Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. Ladies and gentlemen, I got Sadie Kaufman with me today. She was supposed to be a lawyer, Columbia trained, Ivy polished, ready to argue in courtrooms built on marble and legacy. But life had other plans. Plans scribbled in blood sugar charts, sleepless nights, and biochemical chaos. Her body became the battleground where Western medicine failed and ancient wisdom took root. When Sadie Kaufman was diagnosed with prediabetes and hormone dysfunction in her 20s, she didn't just seek help, she declared war. A rebel in a vegan womb raised by health conscious parents, she realized the system had fed her dogma without discernment. So she left the script behind and wrote her own in blood, sweat, microbes, and metabolic fire. From 2000 to 2006, she dove headfirst into the molecular river, studying microbiology and advanced biochemistry at Columbia by day, decoding her own internal wilderness by night. She read her body like a sacred codex, one test tube at a time. She began crafting what would become a revolutionary framework, the Sadie Kaufman Method, a roadmap for reclaiming sovereignty over your cells. By 2010, after training in metabolic nutrition and transformational coaching, Sadie opened her practice, and word spread like wildfire through hushed whispers and long distance referrals. Now her clients span continents, cultures, and belief systems, drawn to her unique fusion of science, spirit, and no BS truth telling. She doesn't promise you easy answers. She gives you tools, data, grit, and the audacity to trust your body like it's your oracle. Sadie, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Wow, that was maybe the most amazing introduction I've ever heard about anyone, and I'm a little bit flabbergasted by it, but it's beautifully said, and so I'm doing great. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think you're amazing, and I think the Sadie Kaufman method is amazing, and I'm excited that we're going to be doing some work together at this Iboga Saves event coming up in June 17th at the Boulder Theater in Denver, and I'm excited to get to talk to you today. So let me just jump right in here, Sadie. What was the first moment your body spoke louder than your education, and what did it say?
Wow. Okay, let's get right into it. I mean, basically, I was raised to think that I would be healthier than the average person because of the very unusual background I have. And so things weren't adding up for a long time, but it was kind of sort of little by little, and it just was easier to try to ignore. But when I was in college in my late teens, early 20s, I'll say I was 20 years old,
Okay.
I was living in New York City, and I felt horrible. I felt sort of all swollen, and I started to lose my hair. And okay, living in New York City was stressful. Being 20 and trying to
Yeah.
figure out life, out for the first time, sort of on my own, was stressful. But when I went to a salon and got my hair cut, and the salon woman told me that your hair is actually falling out. You're losing a lot of hair. It's like what I suspected, but it was something so private, was
Yeah.
confirmed. And it was like an alarm bell got very, very loud. And that was something that had been building, but then it got to this point where I couldn't ignore that. It felt like my health had somehow gone off the rails, and I wasn't living the normal experience, certainly of anybody that I knew, but also anybody that age.
Yeah. What do you like that point in time? I got to imagine you're starting to freak out a little bit. Like, what is going on with my body?
Well, I was definitely already living symptoms that I didn't understand, and I had already started to go to different doctors and herbalists
Yeah.
since I was a teenager, because sort of things weren't sort of evolving the way that you should expect. So I didn't have a normal hormonal sort of development, and so I was going to doctors wondering where my period was, things like that.
Right.
And then around 20, when I was in New York, I started having, it's almost like things kind of fell off a cliff, and I started having way more extreme problems. And the doctor visits escalated, and they became a huge aspect of my life. So I was studying to be a lawyer, and in the sort of normal day-to-day experience of an undergraduate. But then the rest of my mindset and my energy was consumed by these symptoms that nobody else that I was around I felt they couldn't imagine, they wouldn't understand. And then these doctors that I was going to were just, basically were not running blood tests, and they would see a thin and young woman and say, "You look fine to me," is what I
Mm.
got a lot of. And maybe you're stressed, but what they weren't telling me is why I had these extreme hormonal symptoms, and I had no energy, all these different things that just had no explanation. And what it felt like very privately is that somehow my life had gone off the rails and my body did not fit together. And I didn't have the instruction manual. I didn't know how to make it work. And my time was passing. So that's really what was, I would say, looking back, an extremely defining experience of my life. And it turned out to change my life really radically.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Sometimes the inability to make sense of a situation when physical manifestations are forming, like that's enough to really put you in a different state of consciousness, and in some pretty dark spots sometimes.
Yeah, and looking back, I can see now as at
Yeah.
50 that it's a lot of people, young people, when they're just kind of reaching 20, they already are struggling in so many different ways. There's so much that you deal with just sort of developing in a normal way, and then when you have these other aspects that are sort of symptoms and challenges, it really can make it way more challenging. And I felt just
Yeah.
very alone and without guidance.
It's so interesting. In our previous exchange, you had mentioned that you were brought up to think you were healthier than other people. Like, what does that mean?
Well, I was born and raised in the most famous vegan community in the US. It was very famous. It was very large. There were 1,500 people living communally, and my parents were founders of that community. And their whole life vision was about having children and showing the world how we could live lightly on the earth in a totally different way than people were sort of conventionally living. And so they were really into, it came out of the 60s in San Francisco,
Yeah.
and they did a caravan of school buses across the country and found
Love it.
land in rural Tennessee. And it was a sort of the fantasy of really like making an idyllic world, a new world. And their world was really about creating a vegan diet for everybody in the community that even excluded honey, because they wanted to be so extreme about it. And the idea was that they could have women healthy pregnancies and healthy babies and grow perfectly healthy kids with no animal products at all. And so because I was the first generation born into this community, it was like we were very self-consciously this example of what could be. And so my parents were really into that. And so that kind of was ingrained in me in my earliest memories. And looking around at sort of the average American with their hamburgers and all of that, we would see them and think like, oh, we're healthier than them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an amazing backstory. Like, it brings up so many questions in my mind, but I'm going to save those for like maybe a different part of the podcast. And so, raised as a vegan, and was it just the diet alone, you think, that sort of led you to have these sort of manifestations of things, or like what else was going on? Was it society, or what do you think?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I have to go back and say
Okay.
that my parents met on this commune and they fell in love and started having babies
Yeah.
immediately, but they were
Love it.
both 100% Ukrainian. And they came from families that really were very much culturally, the roots were very much intact, and their diets were, I would say, pretty tied to their lineage
Yeah.
until they made radical dietary changes in their 20s, and then decided to have babies in a totally different sort of dietary tradition but from one moment to the next. And my lineage really does play a very important role in putting the pieces together of what happened in terms of my health. So long story short, our diet was such a departure from what our parents had eaten and what the expectation of a body that was sort of raised in this particular tradition. Like, what were they eating, the nutrient density, the types of foods. And so I would say that was a huge factor that I didn't understand until later. And then the other thing is understanding the details of, like, really learning about the details of nutrition and how that works to create healthy development and a healthy body. And what we had in my community was, it was a lot of people eating for very little. Money had to be sort of spread. And so there was a lot of concern about feeding many mouths the cheapest way possible. So our sort of cornerstones were boiled soybeans, margarine and tortillas, like white flour, because that could be spread, and it was vegan, and it looked nutrient dense on paper. But that is the very big experience that I proved out with my own health and my life, that what may look like it adds up to something that defies all eating cultures throughout history, it doesn't actually add up in terms of how the body works. And now I have been forced to learn that myself. So basically, it's the last thing that I would have ever expected, is to have this career and to be the spokesperson for the power of traditional food coming from where I come from.
I love that answer. The question that comes to mind for me is, you don't really ever hear about what is a particular person's diet, and like, what was their grandparents' diet and their parents' diet, and what region did they come from. But that has to play a huge factor. Like, my wife is Laotian, and her family, they eat totally different than I eat. And you could say that that's the society, and maybe it is. But what about the nutrients my body needs, being this guy from Caucasian Acres, versus my wife, whose family is from a part of Eastern Asia and stuff? Like, there's a real difference there, and your body needs that, right?
Well, that is true. And that is where I sort of put the pieces together. But basically, I went from no information about nutrition except for what I was raised with. And then I had all of these health problems that could not be explained. And then basically I ended up in that. I had a very extreme transformative moment that kind of made me dive into this question of following the thread of what happened to me, how could I undo it, and that led me to what I do now. But basically, the first question was, what is going on with my body, and why do I feel so horrible, and why do I feel like I've been robbed of the kind of the life and the energy that should be available to me at 20 years old.
Yeah.
And so I ended up in the office of an endocrinologist at 25 years old. I had graduated from Columbia. I had all my student loan debt, and I was fresh, ready to get out there in the world. And this is the first doctor who ran metabolic tests on me. Everyone else, maybe they'd run one or two things, but there was nothing that they really gave me to work with. And he did a full metabolic panel. He's a hormone doctor, so he ran all these metabolic tests. And when they came back, he was completely shocked. I had the metabolic profile of, he said, a person in their 70s who was extremely ill, and who had been, basically dealing with degenerative disease in their 70s. And I was at 25. I had, just starting out in the world, and I was never overweight, and I never had any kind of symptoms on the surface that would show this. And he said, yeah, it almost looks like these blood tests are a mistake, like they're somebody else's blood tests. And he said, like, I've never seen this before. You look totally different than your blood tests are showing. And he asked me this question that changed the course of everything. He said, well, what did you grow up eating? And I said, well, I was raised vegan. And his little casual comment was the shifting point. He said, well, maybe you wouldn't have all this early aging if you had eaten a more normal diet. He said, I don't know much about nutrition, but it occurs to me that maybe there's something there. And that was like, my jaw was on the floor. And that was the absolute last thing that I would have ever expected anyone to tell
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And so he wanted to put me on a list of pharmaceuticals, from
Ooh.
high blood pressure medicine for men, because basically I had triglycerides, cholesterol, uric acid of somebody very, very sick and in an extreme, in a crisis. And so he was worried that, you can't walk around with these levels. This is extremely dangerous. So he had all these pharmaceuticals he wanted to put me on, but he said, they're not really tested on women of your age and your stage of life. And a lot of them, your body adapts to, and you're not going to get off. And so here I am with all my student loan debt, and now I'm going to be taking geriatric medication. It sort of felt like what he was actually saying is, you're not going to have a normal life. This isn't available to you. You're just going to be managing conditions. And that lit a fire in me. It just turned something on in me, which was, that is not going to be my reality. That is not a possibility. I see that and I say no. And so I said to him, give me 6 months, because one thing I already knew about myself is that I am a researcher and I am a very, very curious person. And I had a reason to research like I had never had before. And so he said, you have 6 months. At 6 months, we can't let this go further than that, but I'll let you go without starting any medications now, and we'll redo blood work in 6 months, and then we'll make our decisions from there.
Wow. So that sounds like the beginning of a threshold guardian right there. What did you do?
Beginning of I knew nothing, but he told me that I had pre-diabetes. I had, I had elevated glucose and very, very elevated insulin. And that was most likely getting in the way of all of my hormones. Yeah. So he gave me just a couple of little tidbits of information, nothing more. But I thought, pre-diabetes, sugar, carbohydrates. So I've become much more meticulous with age, but back then this was sort of the first experience where I said, okay, I'll track every gram of carbohydrate that goes into my mouth, because all I know is carbohydrates have something to do with sugar, and I'm gonna beat this thing with detail and consistency. So I went around like a detective with a little book, and literally everything I ate, and I did this for about 2 years, I kept track of every gram of carbohydrate that I ate in the day, and literally in my little writing. And what happened, though, was profound. So I just did it, and I figured I'll figure it out as I go, and we'll see what else needs to be solved, but I'll start here. So that's all I did. And in 6 months, I went back to him and we did new blood work. And he actually thought that there had been a mistake and that there was a confusion at the lab, because my triglycerides, for example, went down from about 300 to 70 in 6 months. Oh. And so it was there were so many radical changes. And all I did was keep track of my carbohydrate without really knowing anything about nutrition or how you could heal yourself at all. And he said, well, we never really tell anybody about nutrition because they don't have discipline, and it seems so, it's not really that helpful. And I was like, but how could you say that? Yeah. Something happened here. And so I was so inspired by that I was determined to keep going. And it started a whole odyssey of using myself as a guinea pig. And long story short, I did heal myself, and radically. And among other things, symptoms that I had were ovaries that were much bigger than they should have been and very inflamed, and doctors telling me I wouldn't be able to give birth naturally and all of that. And I followed the thread. I just kept following the thread and going deeper and deeper into sort of answering the next question and the next question. And I guess that's really my story. So much can happen just from focusing really consistent attention on a problem, whatever the problem is, and asking really specific, thoughtful questions, and having the attention to live and experience the answer to the question, and then go to the next. And now it's 25 years later, and I've now created a method that doesn't just work for me, it's basically seen me through all sorts of sort of rigid ideas about what could and would be possible, to realize that there is no perfect diet. That's the final learning of this whole odyssey. There's no perfect diet. My diet as a child wasn't perfect, but there isn't any perfect diet for anyone. There's only the right diet for each person depending on where they are. And when we know where a person is very precisely, when we map them and we find out over a variety of different metabolic systems, from easily accessible blood tests, where they are right now, and I'm talking little babies to our oldest client died at 103, we need to know 2 points. Where are they and where is optimal? Once we have those 2 points, we can start, the GPS gets connected again and we're not lost anymore, okay? So no matter what you want to heal, whether it's physical, emotional, all kinds of things that feel like they're so abstract, they're not actually that abstract. If you're finding these 2 points in terms of how your body is actually functioning now. And that actually ties back to your question about you and your wife and how different people need to eat. There's a lot of information about genetic ancestry and how that relates to your nutritional needs, but there's a much simpler way of sort of sorting it out. And that is knowing how to work with very accessible blood tests, because the body will tell us where it is right now. Even in a family full of people who might have a similar background, but they metabolically they can be expressing incredibly differently. So we don't need to have dogma about where you're from or where your wife is from and what that means. What we do need to do is look and see what's expressing now in things that you can feel and that you can't feel, and then what do we do with that information?
That's such a beautiful answer, right? I think you get to see not only the Sadie Kaufman method for eating right and having nutrition, but you get to see a window into the Sadie Kaufman method of how to move through life. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Where does it start? So like, let's say that someone is curious about it. Do people come in and get a blood test, or can you walk us through what something might look like for someone who's curious?
Yeah. So it's actually pretty similar regardless of the client. Even though as I said, we have worked with people over the spectrum of health challenges, backgrounds, ages, everything, every kind of diversity you can imagine over the last 20 years we've worked with. But what we've seen works the best in terms of the format is every single person does the same list of blood tests. And we work with these blood tests. It's very important to me that, first of all, the blood tests are done locally and we work with people internationally. So I always want the tests to be very accessible. And that's a very important part of our approach versus other types of functional medicine and other kinds of longevity work that's out there. We're consciously looking to squeeze the most actionable information out of routinely accessible tests. So there's a huge missing piece. There's a lot of great doctors and practitioners who are so focused on innovation and new and better and more expensive that they can actually get lost in the details and really end up with little information, just like conventional doctors, because they're going in too many different directions. I'm not interested in that. I want to absolutely exhaust the information in the test that we all have access to, okay? And so that's what we're all about. So we do an incredible deep dive into every single client's blood work. And we work with the results of the tests way beyond what would normally consider these normal ranges. What we see is that so often the ranges are actually so broad because what's happening is we're getting compared to open populations that have nothing to do with how an individual's microenvironment really functions normally or optimally. And so that's such an unfortunate misuse of resources that are absolutely valuable if we know how to use them. So what we're doing is we're looking at every person like a very unique microenvironment, and we're using the blood test to assess what is normal function in this microenvironment and what is the aberration. Where are the sort of deviations from this person's version of normal? And we're clustering information and running all these different calculations that has evolved. I mean, basically what I was looking for when I started this is, I want operating instructions for this body. You know, I've been given this body, I'm 20 years old, I want to know how to work it. I want to use it to the best result. I want to live a great life, and I have to live it through this body. So there's no separating that. And so I want guidance, and none of these general bits of information are working for me. And so that's how my mind works. And so that's what we do with blood tests. And so then once we have a person's blood test, we create our own lab chart for them. They fill out a bunch of a whole long detailed questionnaire. But what's important is that we don't start with their story, and we don't start with their symptoms. We start with the blood work first, always. And I don't even look at the age or anything. I want nothing that's going to color my idea of what I should expect here. I want to really give the body a chance to share what is happening. And that is, it's just such an amazing experience to be reviewing these blood tests all day, every day, from every different background, and seeing the patterns that emerge. Because what you see is something so amazing. I mean, I've learned things that I've never seen anywhere else but in our work, which is a very different view on the cycle of life and aging and illness. It all looks really different from this perspective. And the idea is this: there's not as much different between very young people and older people, except if you're looking through the lens of metabolic efficiency and inefficiency. Because young people, very often, if you know what tests to do and know what to look for, they've got big problems that you wouldn't know unless you did the right test, because they have extra energy to compensate for their symptoms. That's the big difference for me between youth and aging, is that you have all this extra energy that would actually just confuse your symptoms and your results. And so if you're older, you have less energy, so you're going to see the symptoms more directly. But it isn't that older people are more necessarily worse off or farther gone than younger people. And that's what happened with me. I had all of these symptoms from extreme metabolic inefficiency, and my body was actually revealing it. If we had done the right test, probably at 5 or 6 years old, I would have had all the information that I needed. And so we run these tests, and then we do a very in-depth consultation that I think of as mapping. And we really sort of guide a client through exactly where they are, what's working really well. It's not about negative. It's like just a kind of a comprehensive view of what's going well, where are the weak points, and then how do those weak points connect. And when we have all of that, as I say, we have a map, and the chaos and confusion and that feeling of hopelessness and oftentimes shame, but also the story. This is so important for ibogaine and for all of this work. So one of the more touching pieces of this work that never ceases to move me is when I see somebody in their 50s or 60s or, whatever age, and they say, I'm very reactive. I'm very anxious. I'm an anxious person. I've always been anxious. My parents are anxious. This is the story of me.
Yeah.
And then before I've even heard their story, I look at their blood work and I see, oh, actually what's happening here is a perfect storm of cellular vulnerability. So you don't have the normal defense on a cellular level. And so literally your cells are feeling exposed and anxious and hypersensitive.
Wow.
And that has a source. It can be spotted really, really directly in blood work. And I don't need your story. I already saw it. And so what's so amazing about that is we don't realize how much we tell little children, oh, you just can't focus. You're not a focuser. You're not a student. You're not, you're whatever. You can't sit still. But maybe, which it happens all the time in my work, oh, that child actually has unstable blood sugar and their body's in a state of emergency. So it isn't them at all. And we don't even know the real potential of that person. We only know that we had the most surface level information about them, and we built a story, and they built a story. And so as you start to unpack that with the help of something like Ibogaine or therapy,
Yep.
I feel like this is a missing piece. It's not definitively the missing piece, but it's a missing piece of going further than just experiencing a shift. It's a beautiful thing to be getting some relief and to see things differently and feel things differently, but you cannot lie to your body, and your body will never lie to you. If you have really low cholesterol that's affecting the membrane of every cell and leaving you very vulnerable and exposed, that can't be explained away, and you can't get rid of it with a treatment. That's like an experience, even a beautiful experience. And so what I would say, this work is sort of the very grounded, practical work that can be a very important complement to all these other sort of modalities of healing and treatment.
Wow. It's amazing to think about the idea of your cells being opened up on some level, and that's what causing you to be anxious. But it makes so much sense when you start thinking of the body as a whole, whether it's your attitude or whether it's the way you feel. Maybe it's a direct reflection of, is it a direct reflection of how your body's acting, like the actual cellular level?
What I find myself telling clients over and over again that is always very moving to me, and I see it really soften people, and just you can see their child face again, no matter what they've dealt with. And it's this: so often we are asking the wrong question. That is really what my work is based on. So we very often go through life, especially if we're challenged and troubled and dealing with trauma, we may be asking ourselves, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my life? Why can't I just do this or that? And you may also have people around you asking the same thing. And so it's kind of reverberating back and forth through your life. And what I say almost daily, once I see a client's blood work, is, well, you're asking the wrong question. It isn't what's wrong here or what is the problem. It's what is going right. Your body is correctly sounding the alarm, and the alarm is not going away because the source of the problem hasn't gone away. So you're trying all these different things to quell the emergency, but the emergency has a very direct source. It's extremely trackable, and your body is actually, in a healthy way, advising you about this emergency. So it's like, what is going right? The question that really is my work is based on is, what is going right that I'm not aware of the source? What is my body, accurately telling me is out of order, out of balance, and won't stop telling me because it can't. It needs to guide me to the source. The example I always give is the engine light on the car. It might be very annoying if that light is lit up, and you might want to put a piece of tape over it. I'm sick of seeing it, but it has a job. And if you put a piece of tape over it, you could stop in the middle of traffic and get a big, have a much bigger emergency. And so that's what this work is really about. It's like learning to pay attention without making a big story, letting it be, and then getting the guidance very tangibly and actionably that you need to use that information to move the needle and get to another place. And the trackability is the other piece, because when people have had traumatic experiences, whether they're physically or emotionally traumatic, one big challenge that I think a lot of people who seek out Ibogaine are interested in is, how do I know how far away I am from my break? Like if I had a breakdown, if I really, really had a trauma that I would like to heal from, very few other practitioners or modalities can reliably say to a person, your breakdown happened here, and now you're here. And then in several months, we can say, and now you're here, and now you're here. And what I can do, and I've seen amazing cases with clients who've had actual extreme breakdowns, even ending up in facilities on lockdown, and horrible experiences. But yet we can show them metabolically, you can relax into where you are right now, because you on a cellular level are so transformed, and it's mappable. Like there, it's not
Yeah.
confusing. You don't have to look, behind you all the time worrying.
What an amazing amount of clarity that must give someone too, to be able to be like, oh, I get it. I am different now. And to be able to see it on that level, I think it's going to be very comforting.
It gives permission. I guess that
Oh, great way
I
to say it.
love this conversation, because I'm feeling you like getting, it's just so exciting for me to be able to talk about the potential for this on the
Yeah.
most sort of visionary level. And I think that's what I see that's so incredibly optimistic. What I really do, yes, I'm looking at blood work. Yes, these are sort of, you know, biological markers and all of this sort of science. But what's really happening, and the work that's really being done, is holding a space for somebody's true ability to take responsibility for their life and their healing, and to know that their body is not against them, and that life doesn't have to just happen to you, and you don't have to be the victim no matter what. I guess that's what this really is about, because it's so objective and trackable, and it's in a language that's standardized that any doctor can work with. I love that about this work, that it isn't me doing muscle testing and telling somebody like, yeah, I think you're well, I think you're better. I don't like that at all, because I want the language of a person's healing and progress into becoming somebody healthier. And I want it to be an objective language. And I also want to know very bluntly if we're off track. I don't want to be lying to myself or lying to anybody. And I don't want another person, a client, to be deluding themselves. And so that's the beauty of this, is that we are letting the body guide us. And it will tell us very, very clearly if we're on course or we're off course. And we have to work with whatever is. And I think that it is a permission, because when you see the needle moving, and you see this objective proof that you're not just more stable, and your family doesn't just notice that you seem more calm, but your metabolic markers look different than any doctor thought was possible, without any, it's not that we never use medication or we're against that, not at all, but it's just there's so much wild possibility when we use food in such a precise and methodical way, and that's trackable. It changes outcomes very dramatically.
It's so amazing. Like I can't, like, permission and intuition. Like the word intuition comes to mind, and it's so interesting to hear people get to trust their intuition, because you do see that with like a lot of different plant ceremonies where people finally come into this state of awareness where they're listening to their body, and everything begins to change. Is what when I say intuition, what do you think of?
What comes to my mind is, so many people actually have a really clear intuition about their health and about their lives that they've kind of suppressed.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I really felt like I wasn't, that something more was wrong, and that all the doctors who said I was normal, I just never really trusted that. But nobody told me anything different, so I just sort of imagined there was nothing else to do. But that is a really common theme. Or like, I knew that. There's a lot more intuition than people give themselves credit for. Number one, that's very important. But also, your intuition gets stronger as you have more congruence from the cellular level all the way up to sort of the highest level of what you want to create in your life. So I refer to it as the law of attraction of the cells. And if you're at odds with your cellular, sort of the truth of what's happening on a cellular level, I'll give you an example.
Yeah,
so
please.
many clients come to me doing all kinds of meditation and yoga retreats with all kinds of, this is like their life focus, and they go all over the world and they spend all their time doing self-care and meditation and all of that. But their cells are in a state of extreme emergency. So you can't meditate that away. And they don't understand why they keep trying, or the plant ceremonies, and they're doing all these things, and yet they never addressed the root of the problem. And so that person's intuition is going to be very impaired in a sense, because the messaging from the cells is really in conflict from their sort of dream of what they're trying to create for their lives. And that is my art, really. I really feel like this is what I'm meant to do in this world, is to help create congruency and sort of clarity and sufficiency and ease on the cellular level. And that's all that I need to help with, because from there, everybody has the ability to manifest their best version from that point. But without that, we have nothing.
I love the clarity of it and the trackability of it and the ability to look at the blood beyond the story. But I also hear like a spiritual component. Like, how do you reconcile those two things?
Okay. I love the question. And here it is. I was raised by extreme, this idea that the world is so already ruined, and the environment is already ruined, and we're this. It might not have been their intention to sort of create that experience for me to grow up in, but that was a very strong sense that I got from my childhood, is that everything is sort of already messed up beyond repair. And I was like, shared a lot of details about, the environment and global warming, and all of this was shared with me at such a young and sort of fragile age. And it was really, really scary to me. And it was really negative, and sort of this dark feeling of like, it's all kind of futile. And that was just not a nice environment to be sort of coming of age in. And what I found from my own health sort of ordeal that turned into sort of this awakening is the body. This is my sort of spiritual perspective. And I love it. Our body is our piece of nature that we've been given to steward. And the body is so responsive to the smallest, not even improvement, just getting out of the way in the smallest way. It rushes back to balance and health. And it doesn't do this one time or randomly. It's super repetitive and trackable and consistent. And it's in fact so consistent that it's changed my whole view about nature and the world. I am the most optimistic person you may ever come in contact with because of this. I know how the body heals, and I know how energetically it heals when it's given what it needs. And so that to me tells me that we're a mirror of nature. And so what I see, and I always tell my clients, is that the body wants to heal until its last breath. It wants to heal. And we can either work against that with our dogma and our limiting stories and all of the things that we do, or we can work with it and give it just the basic components to do what it's made to do. And because of that, I've really stopped so many of my own limiting beliefs about what's happening in the world and all the bad news. And I've really started to believe that as I have a state of sufficiency in me, I literally become the change, but literally on an energetic level that I want to see in the world and be. And that is what I see all the time with my clients. They come to me with all these problems, and I don't take a therapy perspective, like tell me all the problems and we'll go and work them out. I'm just saying, let me get in there like a mechanic and get into those dysregulated systems and start to give them the system what it's demanding, and sort of put things a little bit more in order, get out of the way. And then they'll come back to me and be like, I can manage my teenagers. My relationship is so much happier. I feel clear about, what I need to do in this. My intuition is working. And it's like that. There you go.
How do you, if I jump back in the conversation a little bit, like how do you decide what's optimal? Like how do you know what's optimal for different organs or different parts of the body? Like that seems like it's a tricky thing to figure out.
It is and it isn't. That's
Okay.
an absolutely fantastic question. But
Yes.
here, it depends on how your mind works and how my mind works. So I'm all about. I would say that I'm a real sort of systems thinker naturally, and I'm a synthesizer of information, but I have a particular agenda. I want the simplest. I always want the simplest. Like cut the bullshit. I mean, I was raised by hippies, and it's always too much jargon and too much like pot smoking like ideology. And I, from a very young age, I was like, can we just clear all this out? I want to understand what are you talking about? And so I want to know. I want the answer, and I want it in the simplest way and the least invasive way now. And so that's what my work, even when we're looking at ranges and looking at information, what I'm looking for, and a lot of this is actually based on pattern recognition. So I've basically just spent decades now looking at the same, kind of piecing together my own version of a master metabolic list that I sort of refine. It's like carving, honing, and like constantly looking at the same thing from all these different angles and seeing like what's superfluous, what's giving me information that works in sort of for various systems, and just basically, yes, looking at the same information and seeing what can we trim out, but then what is the most, what's actionable here? Like how can I use this information to get a very particular result? And so what I've seen after all that pattern recognition is this is a weird experience that I've come to. I want this to be studied. And I actually, I've been trying to get clinical trials based on certain versions of my work, because again, I have all this data over all these years, and yet I feel like I'm such a small, sort of, the study is much smaller than it should be, and I'd love to see it sort of expanded. But what I see with this work is it's just the body is so precise. That's the thing that I never quite expected to see. So I came from so much imprecision, and then I had all this early aging, and it was like, oh, this is just going bad, and it's never going to get corrected. How could this get corrected? And then what I saw is when I just got out of the way of the body in these just very basic ways, because in the beginning I really knew not very much, it didn't just get a little bit better. And I think that's the thing that was most surprising for my personal experience, and then for when I started to sort of try this on other people. What I saw in myself, and I see, now in hundreds and hundreds of cases of more diverse than you can imagine, is the amount of precision. So albumin, a perfect albumin is 5. Most people are between 4.5 and 5. Okay, when albumin is down at 4, there's a problem. When it's under 4, there's no immune reserve, and this person is in an emergency and probably has some kind of a big problem that's going to turn into a diagnosis. It's that precise. So there's a lot that might be expressed a little bit differently, but optimal is optimal. And I think that's the thing that it's a conversation that's really not out there, even in the worlds of sort of biohacking and everything.
Yep.
Because the difference between this and biohacking is it's a secret, but you don't have to add a lot more to sort of optimize. What I'm saying is if you take things away, the extraneous or the things that are in the way, if you take them away, we're much more perfect than we realize. And the body is this machine is like a Lamborghini that we don't even know how to change the oil of. Literally, we're driving it off the road and we're letting it, overheat because we don't know how to manage it. But if we do have even just basic guidance, it starts to perform as it was made to, and it is miraculous.
I love that. Especially in a world where there's so much jargon and there's so much talk about optimizing and diet and nutrition and all these add-ons, and you can get these HGH injections, and you can get this bioidentical hormone replacement, and you can get this thing, and you can get this add-on. It's so refreshing to hear, like, just get the bad stuff out of the way.
But it's so common. I'll see people,
It
these
is.
billionaires who come to me with like every kind of test you can imagine. And the thing is, they have the same information as doing no tests because nobody has really made real use of any of the tests that they've done. And so it is actually a lot simpler than people would really imagine. And that's the great news, because some of my best clients, so I live in rural Mexico, outside of Mexico City, and I healed myself. So I started out with polycystic ovaries that were 3 times the size of normal ovaries. And my endocrinologist telling me after an ultrasound in my 20s, like, you're probably not going to get pregnant if at all, not very easily. And you're going to have a lot of challenges. And this is just part of it. Cut to when I got pregnant with my daughter, totally naturally, living in rural Mexico. And I had an ultrasound done on my ovaries when I was already pregnant. There was no sign that there had ever been a problem. So the ovaries completely went back to perfection. And I mean, just to imagine that that's even possible it's so amazing. And what I started to do is work with local people around me. And I actually started working with the indigenous population, the Mexican indigenous population of my town. And they were amazing clients because they have a really strong nutritional history that they're kind of more recently ignoring. But this idea of being able to use food to heal resonated with them, and they were able to take the guidance really, really carefully. And so it was like a really good fit. But it was like, even though the cultural differences were so broad, the truth of it, the simplicity of it, and that it didn't involve a lot of expensive supplements and powders. And it wasn't like, I was telling them, actually, you can use your oxtail that you already eat. That is going to be so healing to correct your digestive problems. And like they loved the fact that I was confirming, showing them that their traditional foods actually were healing foods in a way that they hadn't kind of been respecting recently in their history. So this is where my method kind of was incubated. And now that it's kind of getting out there, I'm just really happy to be able to share something that's really intercultural. There's a huge payoff in terms of getting results, really powerful results. But I love that I'm not having to tell a person like, you have to get rid of the food that you're used to and go and eat this other thing, or like start juicing or whatever. It's really good news in that way, because it's not elitist, actually, in a sense. It's like we can really make healing much more accessible, and taking control of our health also accessible. It's not about biohacking. It's about respecting the wisdom of the body itself and learning how to support its healing. And so that's why I keep the whole thing so pared down. It's very important to me that I don't gum up the system, that I really stick with what works, and really keep it, again, as actionable and pared down as possible. So because you can always build more and add more detail if you've really changed the base and really sort of have a firm base to work from. But what I see much more often is people grasping for all kinds of different interventions, remedies, treatments, but they actually, the base, what they're eating every single day is actually working against all of the things that they're doing. And so you have really very little. You have nothing if you're doing that. It feels exhausting. It feels like you just can't get on top of whatever you're dealing with. But once we sort of pare down, so we actually have so many of our clients taking away supplements, they come to us with these long lists of what they're taking, and we say, food first. You're going to get rid of pause all of that for a month. We're going to show you how you need to eat. We're going to check your blood work at the end of that month, and then your body is going to guide us from there. That's really sort of in a nutshell how the process works. We guide you for the beginning, just to kind of get some momentum, but then the body guides the rest of the way, and there's no confusion. We're not surprised when we see very different guidance, for different bodies, because that is the nature of humanity. We're adaptable, and we have very different metabolic sort of strengths and weaknesses. And once we know where to look, those come out really clearly. And all we really have to do is watch and listen and get and sort of create efficiency along the way. So reduce the extra work. That's the key.
It seems to me on some level, like, do you see, I've noticed quite a few people, and in my own life myself, I know when I start eating better, like I start thinking different. And I've gotten to the point too where like my whole life has changed on so many levels. But is there a risk of people that start eating better going back into a world or a lifestyle that doesn't fulfill them? And then the society wreaks havoc on the blood again?
Wait, say that again. I want to
Okay.
make sure I really understand
Yeah.
what you mean.
So it's like, let's say, for example, like I come down and I change my blood work and we get some real awesome results out of it. I start thinking a little bit different, but then I go back into the environment of a home and maybe in a relationship where you're not real happy, or you're at a job and you're not real happy. Does that, I guess that's kind of epigenetics in some way, but is that changing the molecular levels again?
Oh,
Or is it
I
a risk?
really, this is a longer conversation, George. I really, really think we're gonna have to take this further, because you're in there, you're asking the good questions. And so the answer is this: resilience to stress is what the goal is here. Resilience to stress, and that's a really different perspective than what you would kind of imagine. I think when people imagine changing your diet and working with diet, they kind of, the mind goes to avoiding triggers and kind of creating this sort of anti-inflammatory bubble that I can then function well in. And then what happens if the bubble is permeated? What will I do? That isn't actually how this approach works. This approach is all about being the healthiest, most resilient version of yourself in the real world that exists now, full of inflammatory, imperfect foods, full of toxins, and full of unhealthy people and triggers. That is the whole point of this approach. I'm looking to create truly resilient people who can be helpers. And those people, and so I'm looking at what do we have to do for their hormones, their nervous system, their nutrient absorption. And it isn't about it's the opposite of creating a perfect environment. In fact, nobody that we work with is ever on a rigid diet long term. We're against that. So we use a very specific diet just to reset and to see sort of how the body responds to this sort of very specific intervention. Yeah. And then from there on, we're looking for how can we introduce diversity and normalcy while managing this individual's particular weak points. And then what we're looking at is the job long-term is recovery rather than staying. So we always say, we want you to isolate inflammation instead of avoid it. And that's true about emotional inflammation. There's really no difference. On a cellular level, there's no difference. Inflammation is inflammation, whatever it is. Your trigger is your trigger. It could be a food, it could be an ingredient, it could be something emotionally triggering. But when you are in a state of sufficiency, congruence, or order on a cellular level, that person is truly adaptable. They can deal with an extreme emergency and they can lead and be a helper. And then, so nobody stays in the parasympathetic side of the nervous system all the time and like rest and recovery. It wouldn't actually be healthy. That's not how we're designed. We're designed to go back and forth between parasympathetic rest and recovery and sympathetic sort of emergency mode. The problem is so many people, because of unaddressed metabolic emergencies, are in, and other problems as well, but are in a sympathetic side mode all the time. And so they're hyper fragile and sensitive. And what they're actually trying to do from that place is manipulate their environment to not overstimulate them more. And so what I always say is, if the cup is full and any extra drop is going to fall out as a symptom or a breakdown or a blow up, you're really not that helpful because that's all you're dealing with, right? But as soon as we can get the cup down to half full and the body can self-regulate, you now have extra. And that extra, your family feels it immediately.
Yep.
The people on the street who you're not even talking to can feel it.
It's so true. It's so true for those people that have found themselves in a situation. Like, it's such a radical shift. This is kind of it's a little bit different, but have you done any testing where like you check the blood work and then check for like brainwave patterns? Or I'm sure there's got to be correlations in there that you could probably measure with some of the testing. Any thoughts on that?
Brainwave. No, we haven't done that. But what we have done is I've worked with people, and I've even worked with groups of people who were dealing with extreme bipolar disorder or heavily medicated, and even in families, like this had been sort of the defining challenge of a multi-generational family. And what I found in my work is that they didn't actually have there was no bipolar disorder coming out in the blood work. What was coming out in the blood work is a kind of metabolic perfect storm of vulnerabilities and inflammation that all sort of came out together to make a person highly, highly fragile and highly reactive. But the most amazing effect was, it isn't saying that you work out your metabolic sort of problems and then everything's solved and you don't need any other intervention. But what it is saying is, instead of putting so much energy into an identity of I have this, I am this, this is me, and this is the medication that I take, it's saying there are all these metabolic imbalances that also create the symptoms of bipolar. And I have done nothing for those. And so as soon as we start chipping away at that whole sort of process that's all creating the same chaos and volatility, you get space and you get ease and you get pockets of parasympathetic recovery. And so that's the thing, is that it isn't so much what you try to do, especially when you're talking about neurological sort of imbalances, that we put so much pressure on ourselves, and even like trying to kind of test and see, what's happening with the brain waves. It's like we want to get more and more and more information. But again, what I see is, if you have the right information and you know what to do with that information, you don't need more. And I'm really here talking to you today because I see such amazing potential for this work with people who believe that they are really hard cases. And I think that ibogaine attracts a lot of people who've had a really hard life, and they've suffered a lot, and they have a very intense identity around everything that they've been through. And I hear that, and I've experienced that with a lot of clients who have been in the process of an ibogaine sort of healing. And what I can offer is there's more there. There's more there beneath the story that we need to work with. And as we work with it, it's no longer about trying to be better, trying to be different, rejecting yourself. It's more about looking at what is and cultivating compassion, just this deep, deep compassion. And I guess that's what I saw. That's the glimpse that I got from my own blood work back when I was 25. When I saw how hard my body was struggling and how good it was doing, considering how hard it was struggling, it touched me so deeply. And it changed everything, because I no longer was feeling so broken. I actually thought, oh my God, I have this amazing supporter who will be with me this whole life, who only wants to help. And I haven't known how to work with it. And from that deep compassion for myself, when I got to sort of understand that, that's what I share. And that's what I really want my clients to get from me, more than any particular assessment or outcome. I just want to be able to share that feeling like, isn't it beautiful to know that you have this support that always wants to do its best. Even if you're giving it all the wrong things, it still doesn't just give up. It never gives up. And I just think, again, that is such good news. It's just such nice news. It's such a different story than we typically hear.
I can totally understand why people say so many good things about you. That's such a brilliant way to look at it. Thank you for that. I don't know that I've ever heard it like that. And thank you for sharing it. I think everybody's a little bit richer for getting to kind of dive in there. I got to get to some questions here in the chat. So
yeah, go ahead.
And otherwise, I'll just keep talking to you and having a brilliant conversation with just us without inviting my audience in here. So Deanna, first off, thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it. She says, yes, in fact, each breath we take stimulates both parts of our autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Thank you, Deanna. Super stoked you're here. I got another one coming in from Ranga, the great Ranga Padmanabhan. Brilliant guy, Ranga. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. He says, do you ever feel like a heretic in a world worshiping sick systems?
No, but that's not how I don't have that view. My view is I train my attention. I think that's what my work is, more than anything, is to consciously place my attention on what's working and what's good. And I do that in the body. So it's not that we ignore what's not working, but what I love to see and what's so inspiring to me is how much is working well, even up until the end. Because I see people's blood work before their last breaths sometimes. And I'm still blown away by how much still works and how much precision there still is in the system. And I think if that's not, so that's so inspiring. And that's what I've decided as my life's work to put my attention on, because there's always things to be focused on, but we're such powerful creators as humans that I think it's just better to, if we have a choice, to look at what's broken or what is working well and to sort of expand that. I guess that's what my work is really all about. It's crowding out illness with wellness. That's it. It's not fixating on the illness and making a bigger story and growing it. It's, can we crowd out the dark or the illness or the disorder with order and health and sufficiency? That's the question that my work is based on. And so far it looks very promising.
I love that. I heard a good quote one time that was, the difference between illness and wellness is I and we. When you start thinking about it's pretty powerful when you start thinking like, whoa, yeah, the story of I and mine and me.
But yes, and there's something that I think would really sort of relate to your audience, which is this. When I was sick all the time and I had my symptoms day and night and I felt like there was no solution, I didn't really care that much, honestly, about the world around me. I'm being very real here. Yeah. What I cared about is how wrong everything was going in my body. It was almost like having bricks surrounding my view. Yeah. My ability to really be empathetic and compassionate and really just even care went way down. The volume was turned way down. And I also sometimes would feel guilty about that. Like, I have no consciousness about anything, about the world. But then what was so nice to see is that I didn't have to try to cultivate a different worldview, not at all. As I healed, and I could see more because I had less of my own crisis in front of my face, my ability to sort of bring into focus the people around me, the world around me, just happened as a side effect. Yeah. And I think that is what we can do with this. That's what the real potential of this is as people are more metabolically healthy, they can be more helpful and they are more a part of healing and making things better. Whereas if they have a dogma about healing and they believe that they need to fight for this or that, but they actually have World War III happening in their gut, it's unlikely that all that fighting is actually going to be expanding into something that's really a great benefit.
It's really well said. I got the great Clint Kiles from the Psychedelic Christian podcast. Everyone should check out Clint Kiles. He's an amazing orator and he's just got a brilliant style and delivery method. So check out the Psychedelic Christian podcast. He says, contagious wellness, George. Clinton and I have this thing where we've been talking about it, and we had this riff where, illness is contagious, and like we're afraid of contagion. If you look at COVID, there's all this fear around contagion and illness. But if that's true, shouldn't wellness also be contagious? And we spoke about it a little bit when we have that energy and you go out there and you influence people. What's your thoughts on the contagion of wellness?
Well, it's kind of like all of us now are very aware of the effect of fear around contagions and sort of germ theory and the fear of all of that. And it goes back to what the intention of this work actually is, which is resilience. It's not avoiding. It's not being sterile. It's not being perfect. It's not being sort of avoiding. It's basically getting into the messiness of life and the stress and the difficulty and being able to do hard things and be exposed to difficult things and come through it better. And that even with your immune system, not challenging your immune system is actually not good for your immune system. And I think that's also true in many other systems in the body. You know that the kidneys, if they don't get enough protein, they close down their function. They actually downregulate. And that's very symbolic of how so many systems in the body work. They need to be worked in order to work. And so this, as I said, this is such a high-powered machine. It wants to run. So we need to let it get exposed to things, but we need to really keep track of this vertical garden. We all have 10 times more microorganisms living with us than human cells. How well we're managing that vertical garden, and if we're really sort of managing it correctly, means that we're way more resilient than somebody else who's just letting the weeds crop up everywhere.
I love it. It's so well said. Who we got over here? Desiree, I see you over here. She says, what's the lie you believed the longest?
Whoa, what is the lie that I believed the longest? That I couldn't have what I want. That I couldn't have, that I just didn't, whatever it was that I wanted, that I couldn't have it. I started believing that when I was really little, and it came from, it's like intergenerational, that, oh no, you can't have that, or don't ask for that, or that's too much. And now this ties very much into what I wanted to make sure I shared with you and your audience. Please. When I was 25, I got those blood tests done by this endocrinologist, and it showed a 70-year-old. Now I'm going to be 51 on June 1st, which is, a week away.
Ooh, coming up. Congratulations.
Yeah, but I'm actually metabolically younger now at 51 than I was at 20 or 25. If you put those blood tests right side by side and you do nothing else, you would think that the blood tests from now are much younger in every way. And that is what I mean by believing the lie that I couldn't have what I wanted. I didn't just want to be healthy, actually, let me be clear. I wanted to be radiantly healthy. I wanted to be like on fire with health. And I got it. So I feel like that is what I want to share to everyone, that like we have to be very, very, very careful of these limiting beliefs that are running us. And even when it's something that seems humble, like, oh, don't ask for that. It's like maybe we should blow up these limitations and really like start wanting. And then like that's how people find me. Up to the moment, we haven't actually done advertising. Our whole work has grown through word of mouth. And it's because somebody has some kind of persistent vision that there's more out there for them. And then they come from Dubai to Turkey to who knows where and find me in Mexico, and they start their healing process. But the desire is the seed, that thing of like, I could have more.
That's beautiful. The desire is the seed. Yeah. How much, I was just speaking with an individual a short time ago, and we were talking about like how much the seeking is part of the healing, like really trying to find out who, or trying to find out why you want to be better. Like that's such a huge part that sometimes gets overlooked. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe why, but also just, I would say like, if I could like pare down the quality that the people have that I had that helped me heal, and that other people have that makes them successful with this method. It's two things. It's genuine curiosity. I mean, that is one of the most powerful tools that will get you all the way there. So like genuine curiosity is really important, and just being open, like open to getting to sort of pivoting and taking on a new identity. I think you've touched on this in different moments of this talk, but in order to heal and in order to become what you want to become, you have to let things go as well. You don't just get the new version and get to keep the old version. And there's loss there, and there's reassessing and sort of allowing your mind to be sort of broken open, and a lot of that is very uncomfortable, and it's not easy. But when somebody has the ability to take responsibility for themselves, so we do the guidance, but if somebody is fundamentally, if life has not made them ready to take responsibility, and that's what I typically say, we don't make anybody ready for this work, definitely not. And there's a lot of people who aren't ready for this work, and that's fine. But life makes you ready. I created this method because I wasn't gonna have that life that this doctor told me was my destiny at 25. I just knew that that wasn't gonna be me, and it gave me this very strong will to follow another track. And so if you have the willingness to take responsibility and you are able to cultivate curiosity instead of clinging to sort of a very big idea of who you are and what it all means, I think that's more important than any idea, because the mind can take us in so many different directions that feel interesting and feel right, but they may just be more mental chatter and distraction. And that's what I'm sort of saying. Be willing to get quiet and just look, and be willing to be moved and softened by information that may be really, really different than you ever imagined. Like, okay, raised vegan I thought my comfort food was raw tofu with soy sauce. That was my comfort food when I was a kid, and bean tortillas with nutritional yeast. And then I found out that I cannot eat another drop of soy. And soy is not for me, and I need to be eating marrow and liver and bone broth, and that's what healed me. And it isn't to say that that's everybody's case, but imagine the shock of a child with this big ego identity of like never touching meat and the hair is falling out, and finding that, okay, you want to heal? You say you want to be like fertile and vital? Well, here's the path. And actually, it horrified a lot of the original founders of this community, and probably still does.
It's so brilliant. Sadie, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You are a lot of fun to talk to, but not only just fun, packed full of really incredible insights. And it's no doubt to me why the Sadie Kaufman Method is catching fire. And as we're kind of landing the plane a little bit, I just wanted to throw it back to you and give you an opportunity to tell people like where they can find you, what you got coming up, and what you're excited about.
Well, where can they find me? We have the Sadie Kaufman Method. SadieKaufman.com is our website. We're on Instagram, and people can certainly reach out through those sort of avenues if they're interested in working with us. But really, we love, we have a really nice, very skilled team here in Mexico that works, in multilingual and serves people all over the world, and that is an absolute pleasure. But really, my passion is this method has been incubated for a really long time, and it needed to be incubated for as long as it was, because it's a very unusual approach and perspective. And now that it's had the right amount of incubation, and I'm so confident of the predictable results that we get. I'm ready to share this more broadly. And so that's why I'm here. It's such an absolute, it's been a mind-blowing experience being here with you and your audience and just hearing your perspective and your take. And I see it's a cross-pollination that for me is absolutely thrilling, because I feel like I've been in this cave doing this work very intensively for all of this time. And now it's sort of ready to get out there. And I so enjoy just interacting with other people in other fields and with other sort of passions, seeing how this can intermingle with what they're doing and really create change. We can do it together. That's the beauty here.
I love that answer. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to the audience for participating, from Deanna, from Lakshmi, from Neil, from Craig, from Desiree. Thank you to everybody in the comments and the questions for participating with us. And hang on briefly afterwards, Sadie, but to everybody else, I hope you have a beautiful day, and go down to the show notes, check out sadiekaufman.com. And that's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.
Thank you.